Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into one of the most important intellectual battles of the modern age, Keynes versus Hayek. Two men, two visions, and one economic crossroads that continues to shape our world today. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why governments print money during a crisis? Or why central banks seem to hold so much power over our everyday lives? Well, that story didn't start yesterday. It started nearly a century ago, during a time of chaos, collapse, and clashing ideologies. Picture the world right after the First World War. Europe was shattered, economies were in pieces, and then, just as the world began to recover, the Great Depression hit. It was an economic earthquake. Breadlines stretched across city blocks, banks failed by the thousands, and confidence in the old system, the so-called laissez-faire free market, evaporated almost overnight. This was the moment liberal capitalism found itself in crisis. The invisible hand? Suddenly people weren't so sure it could handle things on its own. That vacuum of confidence didn't last long, though. Two men stepped into the arena, each with a wildly different diagnosis and an even more different prescription. On one side, we had John Maynard Keynes, a British economist who believed that markets were inherently unstable and that government had to step in to save them from themselves. And on the other side, Friedrich Hayek, an Austrian thinker who warned that trusting governments to steer the economy was not only risky, it was dangerous. Hayek argued that freedom, not control, was the key to a thriving society. Now this wasn't just some academic disagreement over coffee. These two thinkers, and the movements they inspired, would go on to shape the institutions, the policies, and the very foundations of the modern global economy. Their fingerprints are everywhere, from how we respond to recessions to the way we think about inflation, employment, and even liberty itself. So buckle in, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about two economists, it's the story of two radically different ideas about how society should function and who should be in charge when it doesn't. Now let's step into the mind of John Maynard Keynes. Keynes looked at the chaos of the Great Depression and asked a radical question: what if the market can't fix itself? See, traditional economics assumed that markets, like a good watch, would eventually win themselves back to balance. Supply meets demand, prices adjust, order is restored. But Keynes wasn't buying it. He believed markets weren't self-correcting clocks, they were more like unstable machines prone to breakdowns. And when those breakdowns happened, they didn't fix themselves. They spiraled. So what was his solution? Intervention, and not the small kind. Keynes argued that when private demand collapses, it's the government's job to step in and fill the gap. That's where his famous toolkit comes in, a set of policies designed to stabilize the economy from the top down. First, deficit spending. If consumers and businesses aren't spending money, the government should, even if it means borrowing. Build roads, fund projects, put people to work. Second, public employment. Don't just wait for jobs to come back. Create them directly, immediately. And third, monetary tools. Use interest rates, money supply, and credit to influence demand. Push the economy when it's sluggish. Cool it down when it overheats. Keynes saw this approach not just as helpful, but essential. He believed that if governments didn't act boldly during downturns, they'd be condemning entire generations to poverty and despair. And here's what's wild. His ideas weren't just debated in classrooms, they were deployed across the globe. The New Deal in America? Keynesian. Wartime mobilization during World War II? Keynesian. The Bretton Woods Agreement that structured the global economy after the war? You guessed it, deeply influenced by Keynesian thinking. So whether you realize it or not, if you've ever heard about stimulus checks, government bailouts, or central banks slashing interest rates to avoid a recession, you're seeing Keynes in action. Even today. But of course, not everyone agreed with this vision. Some saw danger hiding behind the good intentions. Which brings us to the other side of this economic showdown. While Keynes was rallying governments to steer the economy like a ship through stormy waters, Friedrich Hayek was sounding the alarm. To Hayek, the real danger wasn't market instability, it was the belief that anyone could control the market in the first place. He argued that the economy is far too complex for central planners to understand, let alone manage. Think about it, every time you buy a coffee, negotiate a salary, or choose where to invest, you're acting on information that only you have. Your needs, your preferences, your local conditions. Now multiply that by millions of people across a country, or billions around the globe. Hayek believed that this information, this deep, decentralized knowledge, simply cannot be captured by any government committee or planning bureau. And here's the kicker: markets, through price signals, actually do coordinate all that information. Quietly, efficiently, automatically, like a symphony with no conductor. Now, here's where Hayek really breaks from Keynes. He warned that once a government starts intervening, even just a little, it sets off a chain reaction. What begins as a noble attempt to stabilize soon becomes a justification for more control. And before long, you're sliding down a slope toward centralized power. Maybe not overnight, maybe not with bad intentions, but gradually, incrementally, freedom starts to erode. To Hayek, this wasn't just an economic concern, it was a moral one. Because freedom, for him, wasn't just a means to prosperity. It was the end, the goal, the foundation of a dignified society. Now, during his lifetime, Hayek's ideas often played second fiddle to the big, bold Keynesian chorus. But in time, particularly in the later decades of the 20th century, his warnings began to ring louder. As people saw the limits of central planning and the dangers of inflation and overreach, Hayek's vision started gaining ground. His legacy? It's written into the rise of neoliberal economic reforms, the push for deregulation, and the modern libertarian movement. Ideas that emphasize individual choice, limited government, and, above all, trust in the market's ability to coordinate free people. So while Keynes built the machinery of intervention, Hayek offered a compass, one that pointed firmly toward liberty. All right, theories are nice, but let's talk about what actually happened when these ideas left the lecture halls and hit the real world. After World War II, Keynesianism became the dominant operating system of the Western economic world. And at first, it seemed to work. Governments prioritized full employment, and they were willing to tolerate a little inflation if it meant keeping people working. Picture this: highways were built, industries roared back to life, and the welfare state expanded. The idea was simple: steer the economy like a skilled pilot, smooth out the turbulence, keep everything in motion. For a time, the post-war consensus seemed to deliver. Keynesian policies were the backbone of growth and stability, or so it seemed. But then came the 1970s. Oil shocks, recessions, and a strange economic illness that no Keynesian remedy could cure: stagflation. High inflation and high unemployment at the same time. It was like the economy had a fever and chills simultaneously. To make things worse, the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, which had pegged global currencies to the US dollar and gold, exposed major contradictions in the Keynesian framework. The tools that once seemed so effective were now misfiring. Governments tried spending more, printing more, borrowing more, but instead of prosperity, they got rising prices and stagnation. People began to question the old playbook. Had the promise of smooth, centralized control been oversold? Enter the neoliberal turn. In the 1980s, leaders like Ronald Reagan in the United States, Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom, and Paul Volcker at the Federal Reserve began applying Hayekian principles instead. They pushed for monetary restraint, deregulation, and a recentering of market forces. The belief was no longer government must fix this, but rather government may be the problem. It was a pivot away from centralized management and back toward decentralized order. So here's the bottom line: Keynes and Hayek didn't just sit on opposite sides of an academic debate. Their ideas played out in the arena of global policy. And as the world swung from one approach to another, the consequences weren't just theoretical, they were lived. Up to this point, we've talked about policy tools, economic theories, and historical outcomes. But now, let's pull back the curtain and ask the bigger question, the one hiding beneath the charts and forecasts. Who decides? Because at its core, the debate between Keynes and Hayek wasn't just about economics. It was about power, about who gets to make decisions in a society, and who doesn't. Keynes envisioned a world where trained experts, economists, planners, technocrats, could steer the ship of state through careful management. He trusted in reason, data, and top-down intervention to achieve stability. In his view, markets were wild horses. Government, with the right hands at the reins, could tame them. Hayek saw things differently. He believed in freedom, not just as an abstract principle, but as a daily practice. To him, individual choice was sacred, and any system that claimed to know better than the people it governed was already veering off the road. Here's the tension. Keynes offered control, but at the cost of agency. Hayek offered liberty, but with risk. One vision centers the state as guardian, the other centers the individual as sovereign. And this is where the moral dimension comes alive. If we hand power to central authorities to manage the economy, even with the best intentions, what are the trade-offs? Can we trust experts to remain humble, to avoid the temptation of overreach, to respect limits? And on the flip side, if we let markets fully govern themselves, are we prepared to live with inequality, instability, or unpredictability? Neither side gives easy answers, but both raise essential questions about human dignity, trust, and responsibility. Because this isn't just about inflation rates or employment numbers, it's about the kind of society we want to build. One where people are managed, or one where they're free to make their own mistakes and their own triumphs. This is where economics becomes ethics, where numbers meet values, and where the clash between Keynes and Hayek moves from the page to the soul of modern civilization. Let's talk about consequences, because no matter how brilliant a plan may look on paper, the real test is what it does in the wild, out there in the world of people, incentives, and unpredictable outcomes. This is where Hayek's warnings start to echo loudest. See, centralized policies often aim to fix a problem, stimulate demand, stabilize prices, protect jobs, but in doing so, they don't just change the numbers, they change the way people behave. Take price controls, for example. They're meant to make goods affordable, but when prices are held artificially low, producers lose the incentive to produce. Shortages follow, quality drops, and suddenly the solution becomes a new problem. Or consider government bailouts. They might prevent collapse in the short term, but they also send a message: take risks, spend recklessly, and if it goes wrong, someone will catch you. Economists call this moral hazard, but let's be honest, it's just rewarding bad behavior. And once these systems are in place, subsidies, entitlements, guarantees, they're incredibly hard to unwind. People adapt to them, businesses structure around them, voters come to expect them, and politicians, well, they usually oblige. Over time, the market signals that used to guide decisions get clouded. Prices no longer reflect scarcity or value, they reflect policy. And once that feedback loop breaks, it's hard to know what anything is really worth. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing that every action has a ripple effect, and the bigger the intervention, the more complex and unintended those ripples can be. So next time you hear a government announce a sweeping economic fix, pause for a second. Ask yourself, what are the incentives it creates? And what might those incentives do over time? Because history shows us again and again, when policies override signals, when central power distorts individual choice, and when intentions outrun outcomes, the consequences are rarely what anyone planned. So, what does all of this mean today? It's easy to think of Keynes and Hayek as figures from the past, relics of dusty textbooks and old debates. But the truth is, we are still living in the world they helped shape. And the crossroads they argued over, we're still standing there. In moments of crisis, whether it's a financial meltdown, a pandemic, or a geopolitical shock, governments around the world almost instinctively reach for Keynesian tools. Stimulus packages, emergency spending, central bank intervention. It's a playbook that feels familiar, but it's also one that raises deeper questions with every new application. Questions like, how much debt is too much? Can we ever stop the cycle of intervention? Or have we built a system that now depends on constant management? At the same time, something interesting is happening, something Hayek might have found fascinating. There's a growing distrust of large institutions, a rise in decentralized technologies. People are gravitating towards systems that don't rely on centralized control, whether that's peer-to-peer networks, decentralized finance, or even cryptocurrency. Think about Bitcoin. It wasn't just invented as digital money. It was designed as a protest, a rejection of central banks and inflationary policy, a way to opt out of a system people no longer fully trust. And that, right there, is the modern echo of this century-old debate. We're seeing a tug-of-war between those who believe we need more control to manage complexity, and those who believe the best system is the one that lets individuals make their own choices, free from top-down commands. Neither side has gone away. In fact, they're both louder than ever. So the question isn't just who was right. It's, what kind of world do we want to build from here? Because we're not just studying economic history, we're participating in it. As we close this journey, let's step back and take in the bigger picture. The story of Keynes and Hayek is not just about policies or economic models. It's about human nature, about what we believe people are capable of, and what we fear they might do when given too much power. History reveals patterns. It shows us that grand plans often unravel in unexpected ways, that good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes, and that systems built on control tend to expand, while those built on freedom tend to require courage. But history doesn't give us certainty. It doesn't tell us what comes next. Are we destined to repeat cycles of boom and bust, stimulus and correction? Will we keep turning to central authorities for rescue, or will new technologies and decentralized models offer a different path? What we can say is this: the questions Keynes and Hayek raised about risk, responsibility, freedom, and control are more relevant now than ever before. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real value of this debate isn't picking a winner, but learning to think more clearly about the trade-offs we make and the systems we build. So next time you hear about a crisis, a bailout, a reform, remember the ideas you heard today. Remember that behind every policy is a philosophy, behind every decision, a worldview, and behind every historical moment, a choice. Thank you for watching. If you found this video thought-provoking, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Truth Behind History, where we uncover the stories they don't always teach you in school. And if you want to go even deeper into the suppressed stories and forgotten truths of the past, check out my book History They Tried to Erase, The link is down in the description. There's more to explore, more to question, and more truth to uncover. I'll see you in the next video.